Putin is holding all the cards as he's feeling out the situation. Check the news. It's all over the place. We've all been hearing about the buildup of Russian troops along the Ukrainian border. In this video, we'll discuss the reasons why Russia may invade Ukraine and what the West, being the United States and NATO, what their response may be. And finally, the big question, is this actually going to happen? Of all the former Soviet states, Ukraine certainly means the most to Russians. This is not only because of historical, but also strategical reasons. The relationship between Ukraine and Russia goes back over 1,000 years. Modern-day Ukraine is where the Russian Empire got its start. And since then, Ukraine has been a part of either the Russian Empire, the Soviet Union, or within the sphere of Russian influence. Strategically speaking, Ukraine has served as somewhat of a buffer between Europe and Moscow. During the Cold War, Russia used Ukraine as a storage for military equipment and weaponry. And listen to this quote from Vladimir Putin himself. This serves as an example how important Ukraine is to Russia. "We are not simply close neighbors, but as I have said many times already, we are one people. Kiev is the mother of Russian cities." And now Putin is seeing Ukraine gravitate away from Russia and more towards the West. In particular, he's really bothered with this pending agreement of Ukraine joining NATO. And that leads us into the motives why we might see an invasion. It's not necessarily that Vladimir Putin and Russia want to conquer Ukraine to make it Russian, more that they see Ukraine slipping away and they want to reestablish that pro-Russian mentality in Ukraine. And another major reason for Russia's interest in Ukraine is there are 8.3 million Russian identifying people in Ukraine. That's nearly 20% of the population. And over the past 3 decades, the Kremlin has witnessed some of their former bloc members and states falling like dominoes to Western ideals. Look at the Baltic states are all now EU members, and a number of the former bloc members like Hungary, Poland, Bulgaria, just to name a few, are now members of the European Union and are adopting more Western ideals. And then adding on top of that, the situation in Belarus over the past year with all the mass protests and revolts against a possible fraudulent election and the Lukashenko regime. And now Ukraine has this agreement to join NATO. Well, the dominoes are falling and there's not many left before they get to Moscow. And if this can happen in Belarus and in Ukraine, many Russians may feel compelled and inspired to join in the Navalny corner and revolt against the current government and system in place. That's why I believe Putin is really feeling the pressure that he needs to get Ukraine back in Russia's corner. Now this Russian-Ukrainian conflict is being re-warmed up, but let's touch on a brief history of the events over the past decade that have led to this point. In 2013, Ukraine and the European Union were on the verge of signing a Ukrainian-EU association agreement. But at the last second, President Yanukovych backed out. This led to mass protests breaking out all over the country, an event known as Euromaidan. And during this time, Ukraine was split. The capital, Kiev, and most of Western Ukraine were very pro-EU, while a large part of the population in Eastern Ukraine were more hesitant. This divide caused some of these protests to get bloody and ultimately resulted in the formation of Russian separatist group. And in 2014, the conflict of Russia and Ukraine broke out and there was war in Crimea and the Donbass region. The end result of this was Russia taking control and annexing Crimea. And in the Donbass region, which saw heavy conflict, the Russian separatist groups were able to take control of Donetsk and Lugansk and now control that area of Ukraine. Now in 2022, if Russia were to invade Ukraine, what will the West's response be? The United States and the Joe Biden administration have already started taking action by putting 8,500 troops on high alert and also removing American personnel from the American embassy in Kiev. However, Joe Biden has given somewhat mixed signals about what the U.S. response might be. On one hand, he's making this strong message, but then on the other hand,
Russia will be held accountable if it invades, and it depends on what it does. It's one thing if it's a minor incursion and then we end up having a fight about what to do and not do, etc.
And then there's NATO, who have given a bit of a stronger response, pledging their support for Ukraine. and they've even started supplying them with military equipment. And then there's the sanctions that are to come, because the West will certainly send sanctions Russia's way. But let's talk about the mother of them all, the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. Shutting down the pipeline would really hit the Russian economy hard. The United States has been extremely strict on Nord Stream 2 pipeline, handing out sanctions to even third-party contractors who worked on the development of the pipeline, and putting a lot of pressure on Europe to shut down and sanction the pipeline. However, it's easy for them to say when they have no benefit to gain from the pipeline. But from the European perspective, this isn't so easy to do, because Europe is quite dependent on Russia for energy. And shutting down the pipeline in the dead of winter might not be the best decision for Europeans. However, if they were to do so, that would send a strong message Russia's way. And now to the question that's on everyone's mind: will Putin invade Ukraine? At this point, I think it is avoidable. However, there is that possibility too. I believe at this point, Putin is taking the temperature of the West, sizing up possible retaliation and sanctions that might be headed Russia's way as they knock on the doorstep of Ukraine. And most importantly, what combat aid might come from the United States and NATO if he does invade. And Biden sent a strong message back Putin's way with putting 8,500 troops on alert. But much of this on both sides, I feel, is a lot of optics and just balking to try and gain negotiation power. And I don't think any party has really made up their mind about the situation yet. The US to the level of what they'll intervene if there is an invasion, and NATO to the level of support they'll lend Ukraine, and Russia themselves if they're going to invade or not. But Putin is holding all the cards as he's feeling out this situation. And there's no question that tensions are rising and this situation is becoming more delicate every day. And thank you guys for watching to the end. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please consider subscribing to my channel, as we'll make more videos like this in the future. Thank you.